Hello and welcome to India Reads. I am Pradeep and we are reading the story of my experiments with truth by Mahatma Gandhi. We are in part 2 of the book and section 24, Homeward. By now I had been there 3 years in South Africa. I had got to know the people and they had got to know me. In 1896 I asked permission to go home for 6 months, for I saw that I was in for a long stay there. I had established a fairly good practice and could see that people needed the need of my presence. So I made up my mind to go home, fetch my wife and children, and then return and settle out there. I also saw that if I went home, I might be able to do there some public work by educating public opinion and creating more interest in the Indians of South Africa. The £3 tax was an open sore. There could be no peace until it was abolished. But who was to take care of the Congress work and the Education Society in my absence? I could think of two men, Adamji Mia Khan and Pasi Rustamji. There were many workers now available from the commercial class, but foremost among them who could fulfill the duties of the secretary by regular work and who also commanded the regard of the Indian community were these two. The secretary certainly needed a working knowledge of English. I recommended the late Adamji Mia Khan's name to the Congress, and it approved of his appointment as secretary. Experience showed that the choice was a very happy one. Adamji Mia Khan satisfied all with his perseverance, liberality, amiability, and courtesy, and proved to everyone that the secretary's work did not require a man with a barrister's degree or a high English education. About the middle of 1896, I sailed for home in the SS Pangola, which was bound for Calcutta. There were very few passengers on board. Among them were two English officers with whom I came in close contact. One of them I used to play chess for an hour daily. The ship's doctor gave me a Tamil self-teacher, which I began to study. My experience in Natal had shown me that I should acquire knowledge of Urdu to get closer with the Muslims and of Tamil to get closer with the Madras Indians. At the request of the English friend who read Urdu to me, I found out a good Urdu munshi from among the deck passengers and we made excellent progress in our studies. The officer had a better memory than I. He would never forget a word after once he had seen it. I often found it difficult to decipher the Urdu letters. I brought in more perseverance to bear but could never overtake the officer. With Tamil I made a fair progress. There was no help available, but the Tamil self-teacher was a well-written book and I did not feel in need of much outside help. I had hoped to continue these studies even after reaching India, but it was impossible. Most of my reading since 1893 had been done in jails. I did make some progress in Tamil and Urdu in jails Tamil in South Africa jails and Urdu in Yerwada. But I never learned to speak Tamil, and the little I could do by way of reading is now rusting away for want of practice. I still feel what a handicap this ignorance of Tamil or Telugu has been. The affection that the Dravidians in South Africa showered on me has remained a cherished memory. Whenever I see a Tamil or Telugu friend, I cannot but recall the faith, perseverance, and selfless sacrifice of many of his compatriots in South Africa. And they were mostly illiterate, the men no less than the women. The fight in South Africa was for such, and it was fought by illiterate soldiers. It was for the poor, and the poor took their full share in it. Ignorance of their language, however, was never a handicap to me in stealing the hearts of these simple and good countrymen. They spoke broken Hindustani or broken English, and we found no difficulty in getting on with our work. But I wanted to requite their affection by learning Tamil and Telugu. In Tamil, as I have said, I made some little progress, but in Telugu, which I have tried to learn in India, I did not get beyond the alphabet. I fear now I can never learn these languages, and am therefore hoping that the Dravidians will learn Hindustani. The non-English speaking among them in South Africa do not speak Hindi or Hindustani, however, indifferently. It is only the English speaking ones who will not learn it, as though a knowledge of English were an obstacle to our learning our own languages. But I have digressed. Let me finish the narrative of my voyage. I have come to introduce to my readers the captain of the SS Pangola. We had become good friends. The good captain was a Plymouth brother. Our talks were more about the spiritual subjects than nautical. He drew a line between morality and faith. The teaching of the Bible to him was child's play. Its beauty lay in its simplicity. Let all men, women, and children, he would say, have faith in Jesus and his sacrifice, and their sins were sure to be redeemed. This friend revived my memory of the Plymouth Brothers of Pretoria. The religion that had imposed moral restrictions was to him no good. My vegetarian food had been the occasion of the whole of this discussion. Why should I not eat meat, or for that matter beef? Had not God created all the lower animals for the enjoyment of mankind? As for instance, he had created the vegetable kingdom? These questions inevitably drew us into a religious discussion. We could not convince each other. I was confined in my opinions that religion and morality were synonymous. The captain had no doubt about the correctness of his opposite conviction. At the end of the 24 days, the pleasant voyage came to a close, and admiring the beauty of the Hooghly, I landed in Calcutta. The same day, I took a train for Bombay. 25. In India. On my way to Bombay, the train stopped at Allahabad for 45 minutes. I decided to utilize the interval for a drive through town. I also had to purchase some medicine at the chemist shop. The chemist was half asleep, and I took an unconscionable time in dispensing the medicine, with the result that when I reached the station, the train had just started. The station master had kindly detained the train for 1 minute for my sake, but not seeing me coming, he had carefully ordered my luggage to be taken out of the train. I took a room at Kellner's and decided to start work then and there. I had heard a good deal about the pioneer published from Allahabad, and I had understood it to be an opponent of Indian aspirations. I have an impression that Mr. Chesney Jr. was the editor at that time. I wanted to secure the help of every party, so I wrote a note to Mr. Chesney telling him how I had missed the train and asking for an appointment so as to enable me to leave the next day. He immediately gave me one, at which I was very happy, especially when I found that he gave me a patient hearing. He promised to notice in his paper anything that I might write, but added he could not promise to endorse all the Indian demands, inasmuch he was bound to understand and give due weight to the viewpoint of the colonials as well. It is enough, I said, that you should study the question and discuss it in your paper. I ask and desire nothing but the barest justice that is due to us. The rest of the day was spent in having a look around, admiring the magnificent confluence of the three rivers, the Triveni, and planning the work before me. This unexpected interview was the editor of the Pioneer, with the editor of the Pioneer, laid the foundation of the series of incidents which ultimately led my being lynched in Natal. I went straight to Rajkot without halting at Bombay and began to make preparations for writing a pamphlet on the situation of South Africa. The writing and publication of the pamphlet took about a month. It had a green cover and came to be known afterwards as the Green Pamphlet. In it, I drew a purposely subdued picture of the conditions of India in South Africa. The language I used was more moderate than the one of the two pamphlets which I have referred to before, as I knew that things heard from a distance appear bigger than they are. 10,000 copies were printed and sent to all the papers and leaders of every party in India. The Pioneer was the first to notice it editorially. The summary of the article was cabled by Reuters to England, and a summary of that summary was cabled to Natal by the Reuters London office. The cable was not longer than 3 lines in print. It was a miniature but exaggerated edition of the picture I had drawn of the treatment accorded to the Indians in Natal, and it was not in my words. We shall see later on the effect this had on Natal. In the meanwhile, every paper of note commented at length on the question. To get these pamphlets ready for posting was no small matter. It would have been expensive too, if I had employed help for preparing wrappers, etc. But I hit upon a much simpler plan. I gathered together all my children in my locality and asked them to volunteer 2 or 3 hours of labor of a morning when they had no school. This they willingly agreed to do, so I promised to bless them and give them as a reward used postage stamps which I had collected. This got through the work in no time. This was my first experiment of having little children as volunteers. 2 of those little children are my co-workers today. Plague broke out in Bombay at about that time, and there was panic all around. There was fear of an outbreak in Rajkot. As I felt I could be of some help in the sanitation department, I offered my services to the state. They were accepted, and I was put on the committee which was appointed to look into the question. I laid special emphasis on the cleanliness of the latrines, and the committee decided to inspect these in every street. The poor people had no objection to their latrines being inspected, and what is more, they carried out the improvements suggested to them. But when we went to inspect the houses of the upper 10, some of them even refused us admission, not to talk of listening to our suggestions. It was a common experience that the latrines of the rich were more unclean. They were dark and stinking and reeking with filth and worms. The improvements we suggested were quite simple: to have buckets of excrement instead of allowing it to drop on the ground, to see that the urine was also collected in buckets instead of allowing it to soak into the ground, and to demolish the partition between the outer walls of the latrines so as to give the latrines more light and air, and enable the scavenger to clean them properly. The upper classes raised objections to this last improvement, and in most cases it was not carried out. The committee had to inspect untouchables quarters. Also, one member of the committee was ready to accompany me there. To the rest, it was something preposterous to visit those quarters, still more to inspect their latrines. But to me, those quarters were an agreeable surprise. This was my first visit in my life to such a locality. The men and women, they were surprised to see us. I asked them to let us inspect their latrines. Latrines for us, they exclaimed in astonishment. We go and perform our functions out in the open. Latrines are for you big people. Well then, if you don't mind if we inspect your homes, I asked. You're perfectly welcome, sir. You may see every nook and corner of our houses. Ours are no houses, they are holes. I went in and was delighted to see that the insides were as clean as the outsides. The entrances were well swept, the floors were beautifully smeared with cow dung, and few pots and pans were clean and shining. There was no fear of an outbreak in those quarters. In the upper class quarters, we came across a latrine which I cannot help describing in some detail. Every room had its gutter, which was used for both water and urine. That means the whole house would stink. But one of the houses had a storied bedroom with a gutter which was being used both as a urinal and latrine. The gutter had a pipe descending to the ground floor. It was not possible to stand the foul smell in this room. How the occupant would sleep there, I leave the readers to imagine. The committee also visited the Vaishnava Haveli. The priest in charge of the Haveli was very friendly with my family, and so he let us inspect everything and suggest whatever improvements we liked. There was a part of the Haveli premises that he himself had never seen. It was a place where refuse and leaves were used as dinner plates and used to be thrown over the wall. It was a haunt of crows and kites. The latrines were of course dirty. It was not long enough in Rajkot to see how many of our suggestions the priest carried out. It pained me to see so much uncleanliness about a place of worship. One would expect a careful observance of rules of sanitation and hygiene in a place which is regarded as holy. The authors of the Smritis, as I knew then, have laid great emphasis on cleanliness both inward and outward. Two passions. Hardly ever have I known anybody to cherish such loyalty as I did to the British Constitution. I can see now that my love for truth was at the root of this loyalty. It has never been possible for me to stimulate loyalty or, for that matter, any other virtue. The national anthem used to be sung at every meeting that I attended in Natal. I then felt that I must join in the singing. Not that I was unaware of the defects of British rule, but I thought it was on the whole acceptable. In those days, I believed that the British rule was on the whole beneficial to the ruled. The colour prejudice that I saw in South Africa was, I thought, quite contrary to the British traditions, and I believed that it was only temporary and local. I therefore vied with the Englishmen in loyalty to the throne. With careful perseverance, I learned the tune of the national anthem and joined in the singing whenever it was sung. Whenever there was an occasion for the expression of loyalty without fuss or ostentation, I readily took part in it. Never in my life did I exploit this loyalty, never did I seek to gain a selfish end by its means. It was for me in the nature of an obligation, and I rendered it without expecting a reward. Preparations were going on for the celebration of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee when I reached India. I was invited to join the committee appointed for the purpose in Rajkot. I accepted the offer but had a suspicion that the celebrations would be largely a matter of show. I discovered much humbug about them and was considerably pained. I began to ask myself whether I should remain on the committee or not, but ultimately decided to rest content with doing my part of the business. One of the proposals was to plant trees. I saw that many did it merely for the show and for pleasing the officials. I tried to plead with them that tree planting was not compulsory but merely a suggestion. It should be done seriously or not at all. I have the impression that they laughed at my ideas. I remember that I was in earnest when I planted the tree allotted to me, and I carefully watered and tended it. I likewise taught the national anthem to the children of my family. I recollect having taught it to the students of the local training college, but I forget whether it was the occasion of the Jubilee or of King Edward VII's coronation as the Emperor of India. Later on, the text began to jar on me. As my conception of ahimsa went on maturing, I became vigilant about my thought and speech. The lines in the anthem, scatter her enemies and make them fall, confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks, particularly jarred upon my sentiment of ahimsa. I shared my feelings with Dr. Booth, who agreed that it ill became a believer in ahimsa to sing those lines. But how could we assume that the so-called enemies were knavish? And because they were enemies, they were bound to be in the wrong. From God, we could only ask for justice. Dr. Booth entirely endorsed my sentiments and composed a new anthem for the congregation, but of Dr. Booth more later. Like loyalty and aptitude for nursing was also deeply rooted in my nature. I was fond of nursing people, whether friends or strangers. Whilst busy in Rajkot with a pamphlet on South Africa, I had an occasion to pay a flying visit to Bombay. It was my intention to educate public opinion in the cities on this question of on this question by organizing meetings, and Bombay was the first city I chose. First of all, I met Justice Ranade, who listened to me with attention and advised me to meet Firoz Shah Mehta. Justice Badruddin Tyabji, whom I met next, also gave me the same advice. Justice Ranade and I can guide you but little, he said. You know our position. We cannot take an active part in public affairs, but our sympathies are with you. The man who can effectively guide is Sir Firoz Shah Mehta. I certainly wanted to see Sir Firoz Shah Mehta, but the fact that these senior men advised me to act according to his advice gave me a better idea of the immense influence that Sir Firoz Shah Mehta had on public. In due course, I met him. I was prepared to be awed by his presence. I had heard of the popular titles that he had earned, and I knew that I was to see the Lion of Bombay, the uncrowned king of the presidency. But the king did not overpower me. He met me as a loving father would meet his own son. Our meeting took place at his chamber. He was surrounded by a circle of friends and followers. Amongst them were D.E. Vacha and Mr. Kama, to whom I was introduced. I had already heard of Mr. Vacha. He was regarded as the right-hand man of Sir Firoz Shah, and Sergeant Veerchand Gandhi had described him to me as the great statistician. Vacha said, Gandhi, we must meet again. These introductions could scarcely have taken 2 minutes. Sir Firoz Shah carefully listened to me. I told him that I had seen Justices Ranade and Tyabji. Gandhi, said he, I see I must help you. I must call a public meeting here. With this, he turned to Mr. Munshi, the secretary, and told him to fix the date of the meeting. The date was settled, and he made me goodbye. He bade me goodbye, it must be, asking me to see him again on the day previous to the meeting. The interview removed my fears, and I went home delighted. During the stay in Bombay, I called on my brother-in-law who was staying there and lying ill. He was not a man of means, and his sister and my sister, his wife, was not equal to nursing him. The illness was serious, and I offered to take him to Rajkot. He agreed, and so I returned home with my sister and husband. The illness was much prolonged than I had expected. I put my brother-in-law in my room and remained with him day and night. I was obliged to keep awake part of the night and had to get him through some of my South Africa work whilst I was nursing him. Ultimately, however, the patient died, but it was of great consolation to me that I had the opportunity to nurse him during his last days. My aptitude for nursing gradually developed into a passion, so much so that it often led me to neglect my work, and on occasions I engaged not only my wife but the whole household in such a service. Such service can have no meaning unless one takes pleasure in it. When it is done for the show or for fear of public opinion, it stunts the man and crushes his spirit. Service which is rendered without joy neither helps the servant nor the served. In all other pleasures and possessions, but all other possessions and pleasures pale into nothingness before the service which is rendered in a spirit of joy. The Bombay meeting, 27. On the very day after my brother-in-law's death, I had to go to Bombay for the public meeting. There had hardly been any time to think out my speech. I was feeling exhausted after days and nights of anxious vigil, and my voice had become husky. However, I went to Bombay trusting entirely to God. I never had dreamt of writing out my speech. In accordance with Sir Firoz Shah's instructions, I reported myself at his office at 5 p.m. on the eve of the meeting. Is your speech ready, Gandhi? He said. No, sir, I said, trembling with fear. I think of speaking extempore. That will not do in Bombay. Reporting here is bad, and it would benefit by this meeting if you would write out your speech, and it should be printed before daybreak tomorrow. I hope you can manage it. I felt rather nervous, but I said I would try. Then tell me, what time should Mr. Munshi come to you for the manuscript? 11 o'clock tonight, I said. On going to the meeting the next day, I saw the wisdom of Sir Firoz Shah's advice. The meeting was held in the hall of Sir Kowas G. Jahangir Institute. I had heard that Firoz Shah Mehta addressed meetings. The hall was always packed. When Sir Firoz Shah Mehta addressed meetings, the hall was always packed, chiefly by the students intent on hearing him, leaving not an inch of room. This was the first meeting of the kind in my experience. I saw that my voice could only reach a few. I was trembling as I began to read my speech. Sir Firoz Shah cheered me up continually by asking me to speak louder and still louder. I have the feeling that far from encouraging me, it made my voice sink lower and lower. My old friend Surgeon Keshava Deshpande came to my rescue. I handed my speech to him. His was just the proper voice, but the audience refused to listen. The hall rang with cries of Vacha, Vacha. So Mr. Vacha stood up and read the speech with wonderful results. The audience became perfectly quiet and listened to the speech to the end, punctuating it with applause and cries of shame where necessary. This gladdened my heart. Sir Firoz Shah liked the speech. I was supremely happy. The meeting won me active sympathy of Sergeant Deshpande and a Parsi friend whose name I hesitate to mention, as he is a highly placed government official today. Both expressed their resolve to accompany me to South Africa. Mr. C.M. Kursetji, who was then a small causes court judge, however, moved the Parsi friend from his resolve as he plotted his marriage. He had to choose between marriage and going to South Africa, and he chose the former. But Parsi Rustamji made amends for this broken resolve, and a number of Parsi sisters are now making amends for the lady who helped in the breach by dedicating themselves to Khadi work. I have therefore gladly forgiven that couple. Sergeant Deshpande had no temptations of marriage, but he could not come. Today he is himself doing enough reparation for the broken pledge. On my way back to South Africa, I met one of Tyabji's at Zanzibar. He also promised to come and help me but never came. Mr. Abbas Tyabji is atoning for that offence. Thus, none of my 3 attempts to induce barristers to go into South Africa bore any fruit. In this connection, I remember Mr. Pestonji Padshaw. I had been on friendly terms with him ever since my stay in England. I first met him in a vegetarian restaurant in London. I knew of his brother, Mr. Barjoji Padshaw, by his reputation as a crank. I had never met him, but friends said that he was eccentric. Out of the pity of the horses, he would not ride in tram cars. He refused to take degrees in spite of prodigious memory. He had developed an independent spirit, and he was a vegetarian, though a Parsi. Pestonji had not quite this reputation, but he was famous for his erudition even in London. The common factor between us, however, was a vegetarianism, not scholarship, in which it was beyond my power to approach him. I found him out again in Bombay. He was a proto-notary in the High Court. When I met him, he was engaged on his contribution to a higher Gujarati dictionary. There was not a friend I had not approached for help in my South African work. Pestonji Pacha, however, not only refused to aid me, but he even advised me not to return to South Africa. It is impossible to help you, he said. But I tell you, I do not like even your going to South Africa. Is there lack of worth in your country? Look now, there's not a little to do for our language. I have to find out scientific words, but this is only one branch of the work. Think of the poverty of the land. Our people in South Africa are no doubt in difficulty, but I do not want a man like you to be sacrificed for that work. Let us win self-government here, and we shall automatically help our countrymen there. I know I cannot prevail on you, but I will not encourage anyone of your type to throw in his lot with you. I did not like his advice, but it increased my regard for Pestonji Pacha. I was struck by his love for the country and for the mother tongue. The incident brought us closer to each other. I could understand his point of view, but far from giving up my work in South Africa, I became firmer in my resolve. A patriot cannot afford to ignore any branch of service to the motherland, and for me, the text of Gita was clear and emphatic. Finally, this is better that one do his task as he may, even though he may fail, then take tasks not his own, though they seem good. To die performing duty is no ill, but who seeks other roads shall wander still. Poona and Madras. Sir Firoz Shah had made my way easy, so from Bombay I went to Poona. Here there were 2 parties. I wanted the help of every shade of opinion. First I met Lokmanya Tilak. He said, "You're quite right in seeking the help of all parties. There can be no difference of opinion on the South African question. You must have a non-party man for your president. Meet Professor Bhandarkar. He has been taking no part of late in any public movement, but this question might possibly draw him out. See him and of course let me know what he says. I want to help you at the fullest extent. Of course, you will meet me whenever you like. I am at your disposal. This was my first meeting with Lokmanya. It revealed to me the secret of his unique popularity. Next, I met Gokhale. I found him on the Ferguson College grounds. He gave me an affectionate welcome and his manner immediately won my heart. With him too, this was my first meeting and yet it seemed as though we were renewing an old friendship. Sir Firoz Shah had seemed to me like the Himalaya, the Lokmanya like an ocean, but Gokhale was as the Ganges. One could have a refreshing bath in a holy river. The Himalaya was unscalable and no one could easily launch forth on the sea, but the Ganges invited one to its bosom. It was a joy to be on board and an oar. Gokhale closely examined me as a schoolmaster would examine a candidate seeking admission to a school. He told me whom to approach and how to approach them. He asked to have a look at my speech. He showed me over the college, assured me that he was always at my disposal, asked me to let him know the result of the interview with Dr. Bhandarkar and sent me away exultantly happy. In the sphere of politics, the place that Gokhale occupied in my heart during his lifetime and occupies even now was and is absolutely unique. Dr. Bhandarkar received me with the warmth of a father. It was noon when I called on to him. The very fact that I was busy seeing people at that hour appealed greatly to this indefatigable servant, and my insistence on a non-party man for president of the meeting had his ready approval, which was expressed in the spontaneous exclamation, "That's it, that's it." After he had heard me out, he said, "Anyone will tell you that I do not take part in politics, but I cannot refuse you. Your case is so strong and your industry is so admirable that I cannot decline to take part in your meeting. You did well in consulting Tilak and Gokhale. Please tell them that I shall be glad to preside over the meeting to be held under the joint auspices of the two Sabhas. You need not have the time of the meeting from me. Any time that suits them will suit me." With this, he bade me goodbye with congratulations and blessings. Without any ado, this erudite and selfless band of workers in Poona held a meeting in an unostentatious little place and sent me away rejoicing and more confident of my mission. I proceeded next to Madras. It was wild with enthusiasm. The Balasundar incident made a profound impression on the meeting. My speech was printed and was for me fairly long, but the audience listened to every word with attention. At the close of the meeting, there was regular run on the green pamphlet. I brought out a second and revised edition of 10,000 copies. They sold like hotcakes. But I saw that it was not necessary to print such a large number. In my enthusiasm, I had overcalculated the demand. It was the English speaking public to which my speech had been addressed, and in Madras, that class alone could take the whole 10,000. The greatest help came to me from late Sergeant Parmeshwaran Pillai, the editor of the Madras Standard. He had made a careful study of the question and often invited me to his office and gave me guidance. Sergeant uh, G. Subramaniam of the Hindu and Dr. Subramaniam also were sympathetic, but Sergeant G. Parmeswaran Pillai placed the columns of the Madras Standard entirely at my disposal, and I freely availed myself of the offer. The meeting at Pachapas Hall, so far as I can recollect, with Dr. Subramaniam in the chair. The affection showered on me by most of my friends I met and the enthusiasm for the cause was so great that in spite of my having to communicate with them in English, I felt myself entirely at home. What barrier is there that love cannot break? Return soon. From Madras, I proceeded to Calcutta, where I found myself hemmed by difficulties. I knew no one there, so I took a room in the Great Eastern Hotel. Here I became acquainted with Mr. L.R. Thorpe, a representative of the Daily Telegraph. He invited me to the Bengal Club where he was staying. He did not then realize that an Indian could not be taken into the drawing room of the club. Having discovered this restriction, he took me to his room. He expressed his sorrow regarding the prejudice of the local Englishman and apologized to me for not being able to take me to the drawing room. I had, of course, come to see Sundarnath Banerjee, the idol of Bengal. When I met him, he was surrounded by a number of friends. He said, I'm afraid the people will not take interest in your work. As you know, our difficulties here are by no means few, but you must try as best you can. You will have to enlist the sympathy of the maharajahs. Mind, mind you, meet the representatives of the British Indian Association. You should meet Raja Sir Priyamohan Mukherjee and Maharaja Tagore. Both are liberal minded and take a fair share in public work. I met these gentlemen but without success. Both gave me a cold reception and said that it was not an easy thing to call a public meeting in Calcutta. And if anything could be done, it would practically depend on Sundarnath Banerjee. I saw that my task was becoming more and more difficult. I called at the office of the Amrita Bazar Patrika. The gentleman whom I met there took me to be a wandering Jew. The Bangabashi went even one better. The editor kept me waiting for an hour. He had evidently many interviews, but he would not so look at me. No, he would not so much as look at me, even when he had disposed of the rest. On my venturing to broach the subject after the long wait, he said, "Don't you see our hands are full? There is no end to the number of visitors like you. You better go. I am not disposed to listen to you." For a moment I felt offended, but I quickly understood the editor's position. I had heard the fame of the Bangabashi. I could see that there was a regular stream of visitors there, and they were all people acquainted with him. His paper had no lack of topics to discuss, and South Africa was hardly known at that time. However serious a grievance may be in the eyes of the man who suffers it, he will be but one of the numerous people invading the editor's office, each with a grievance of his own. How is the editor to meet them all? Moreover, the aggrieved party imagines that the editor is a power in the land. Only he knows that his powers can hardly travel beyond the threshold of his office. But I was not discouraged. I kept on seeing editors of other newspapers. As usual, I met the Anglo-Indian editors also. The statesman and the Englishman realized the importance of the question. I gave them long interviews and they published them in full. Mr. Saunders, editor of the Englishman, claimed me as his own. He placed his office and paper at my disposal. He even allowed me the liberty of making whatever changes I liked in the leading article he had written on the situation, the proof of which he sent me in advance. It was no exaggeration to say that a friendship grew between us. He promised to render me all the help he could, carried out the promise to the letter, and kept on his correspondence with me until the time he was seriously ill. Throughout my life, I have had the privilege of many such friendships which have sprung up quite unexpectedly. What Mr. Saunders liked in me was my freedom from exaggeration and my devotion to truth. He subjected me to a searching cross-examination before he began to sympathize with my cause, and he saw that I had spared neither will nor pains to place before him an impartial statement of the case, even of the white man in South Africa, and also to appreciate it. My experience has shown me that we win justice quickest by rendering justice to the other party. The unexpected help of Mr. Saunders had begun to encourage me to think that I might succeed after all, in holding a public meeting in Calcutta. When I received the following cable from Durban: Parliament opens January, return soon. So I addressed a letter to the press in which I explained why I had to leave Calcutta so abruptly and set off to Bombay. Before starting, I wired to the Bombay agent of Dada Abdullah & Co. to arrange for my passage for the first possible boat to South Africa. Dada Abdullah had just then purchased the steamship Courland and insisted on my travelling on that boat, offering to take me and my family free of charge. I gratefully accepted the offer, and in the beginning of December set sail for a second time for South Africa, now with my wife and two sons and the only son of my widowed sister. Another steamship, Naderi, also sailed for Durban at the same time. The agents of the company were Dada Abdullah & Co. The total number of passengers these boats must have carried was about 800, half of whom were bound for Transvaal. With this, we come to the end of part 2, and we close the reading today. What do we have here to unpack? A lot of stuff, not very important all of them, but basically talking about how Gandhi started making connections in India. He started traveling across India, building his connection. He went back to his old connections of Feroz Shah Mehta, Tyabji, the lawyers from Bombay, and he had a series of meetings in Bombay. This also gave him an opportunity to go and meet his brother-in-law and sister. His sister was staying in Bombay. He realized his brother-in-law was grievously ill. He brought him back to Rajkot and nursed him continuously. Uh, Before he left Bombay, he had a good meeting with Firoz Shah Mehta, who promised to have a meeting in which Gandhi could address and talk about the issues of Indians in South Africa. Gandhi then utilized the time in Rajkot to work on um, his brother-in-law. He continued to nurse him till the last day. His brother-in-law unfortunately died in Rajkot. The day after which he died, Gandhi moved to Bombay and had to make a speech. This was a day before the event, and he met Firoz Shah Mehta, who asked him to share the speech manuscript. Gandhi said that he had not prepared it and he wanted to speak extempore. Firoz Shah Mehta suggested that he not do so and asked for a copy of the manuscript. Before daybreak, Gandhi made sure that it was sent to Firoz Shah Mehta that night at 11. The next day morning, Gandhi started speaking. With the speech, he found that his voice did not have the impact. Firoz Shah Mehta asked him to speak louder and louder and encouraged him more. Then he kind of handed his speech over to another gentleman, Mr. Vancha, whom the public asked for. Mr. Vancha was an accomplished speaker. He read the speech very well, and the audience there also responded very well to him, giving applause where he punctuated and crying out shame, shame where the topics were such. So the meeting went off very well, and Gandhi was quite happy with it. Gandhi had earlier in his so what had happened in the journey from South Africa was that Gandhi had taken a boat to Calcutta, or rather ship to Calcutta, where the highlights of his journey was that he had learned Tamil and Urdu to a great extent. Uh, Later he could never do a follow-up study of these languages, and so he was not very good at it, but he acquired a fairly decent knowledge of these languages. Now, on his after he landed in Calcutta, he got onto a train to Bombay, and on his way to Bombay, when the train stopped in Allahabad, he got down and he did a tour. While he did that quick tour and bought medicines, he missed the train. The station master tried to wait for him, but realizing that Gandhi is not coming, he pulled out his luggage and put it on the platform. Gandhi used this time and had the first meeting with a publisher in Allahabad. The newspaper was, I think, called Pioneer, and that kind of set the benchmark for all his activities. In the interview, he spoke in depth about the situation of South Africans, and he decided that he would write a proper note on it. Of course, this interview led to him being flogged in Natal, which he would cover in later chapters. But the interview in Allahabad kind of triggered something in him, and he, instead of going to Bombay, took a train directly to Rajkot and spent the next 1 month writing on what he called a green pamphlet. He made 10,000 copies of it and shot it to different newspapers and editors across India, also to the heads of political parties and important people who had some level of influence. Now we come back to the stage where he returns to Bombay and he's had a successful meeting. He realizes that he could do this in other cities. The next city that he travels to is Poona, where he meets three stalwarts. One is Justice Ranade, the other is Lokmanya Tilak. They encourage him very much. They say that we are at your disposal. Let us know what you want. The issue of Indians in South Africa, no doubt, is not so important in the current context in India, but it is something that you should continue fighting for. He then goes on to meet Gokhale, whom he completely falls in love with. So he explains, he gives a metaphor for all the people that he has met. Lawyer Firoz Shah Mehta, who is like the Himalayas. He's somebody that Gandhi looks up to, but can never be scaled, and that's a metaphor he has for Firoz Shah Mehta. For Lokmanya Tilak, he calls him like an ocean, which again cannot never be surpassed. He's deep and he has a lot of insights. But Gokhale, he found him like the Ganges, pure and somebody who's welcoming. So Gandhi was completely in love with Gokhale and he enjoyed the experience. Gokhale, of course, introduced him to other people. Also, Justice Ranade was of great use to Gandhi, and obviously Gandhi continued meeting the newspaper editors in Poona. From there he went to Madras, as it was called then. And in Madras, the help that he had given to Balasundaram or Balasundaram in South Africa, the news who was a one indentured laborer who had been hurt in South Africa, and Gandhi had helped him. We had covered in one of the earlier recordings. The news had spread across, and he was received very well in Madras. Uh, in Madras, Gandhi realized that the language that was used commonly was English, and so he realized that even his calculation of doing another 10,000 run of his pamphlets would be completely utilized here. The newspapers were quite welcoming to Gandhi. He managed to give interviews to Madras Standard, The Hindu, and a few more. So it was again a very successful interaction that he had there. From there, he moved to Calcutta. In Calcutta, he had no one to help him. He kind of started taking appointments with an English gentleman whom he got through his acquaintances. The guy was obviously very moved by the plight of Indians in South Africa and agreed to take up the cause. He said that he is at Gandhi's disposal, like the others who had said he is at Gandhi's disposal. Gandhi wanted to try and wing off an opportunity to do a public speech, but unfortunately, before he could do that, he got a telegram from South Africa saying that the elections are going to be declared in January, so you need to come to Natal as soon as possible. So from here, Gandhi rushed to Bombay. He got his family there. Uh, his boss, Seth Abdullah's company, had bought a boat, and so Gandhi was given a um, transportation free of charge. Gandhi gladly accepted it, so he sailed to South Africa along with his wife, his two children, and his sister's child. His sister's husband, who had passed away, their child. Gandhi took him, and they all sailed to South Africa. So I would kind of stop here, and it's not a very insightful chapter here. Here you only get to see how Gandhi kind of made a series of contacts across different people across different parts of India. Some British, some Indian, many of them South Indian. Some knew the language, some did not know the language. But he was slowly getting up or climbing up the ladders of political influence in India, as he had done in South Africa. Of course, these are still early days for Gandhi, because he has, over a period of time, acquired the confidence to give full-length interviews to editors of major newspapers, some of which are sent, like the interview that he gave in Allahabad gets sent to different publications across the world. It goes to Reuters London and then gets transferred to Reuters in South Africa. So his sphere of influence is growing, his level of confidence is growing, his ability to communicate the plight of Indians in South Africa has improved significantly. So these are some of the improvements that he's made in his life, some of the accomplishments that he had achieved till this point of time. So that is kind of summarizing this section of the book. I will see you all in the next chapter. Do continue to give your comments and suggestions, and I really look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Thank you and bye.